When did you realize your best friend was no longer your best friend? I had a best friend in high school. I started realizing she wasn't my best friend when she'd keep canceling plans with me. And most of the time when we'd hang out, it was because we saw each other at school already earlier in the day. I came to the conclusion that how can I consider this person be my best friend if she doesn't make that much time for me when we don't go to the same school anymore? She also disappeared out of my life 95% plus of the time, every time she had a boyfriend, and would come back to me when she was single. I have another friend who makes time for me always in her schedule, regardless of where we work or go to school. This friend even wants to go on vacations with me, so I slowly started realizing this person was my real best friend.
That's a pretty relatable situation. It's tough when you realize someone you considered close isn't really there for you. The way your other friend makes time for you shows she's genuinely invested in the friendship. It's cool you figured that out. Having someone who prioritizes you feels better in the long run. It's all about finding those who truly value your time and presence.
When at my birthday party, she ate a fortune cookie and we asked what the fortune was, and she jokingly said, "My best friend will murder me tonight." Then she looked at someone else in the room and backed away and acted afraid and said, "Keep him away from me." Everybody laughed, and I don't think she had any idea what just happened. But that was when I realized that my best friend didn't consider me hers.
That moment was kind of eye-opening. Everyone was just laughing, but it hit differently when you realize you weren't seen as that close. It's awkward when you have those realizations about friendships. Makes you think about how you value your connections. Sometimes, jokes reveal more than we want to acknowledge. In a way, it's all part of figuring out who really counts in your life.
When she decided that I was a default friend, she basically only wanted to hang out when her real best friend was busy. We had been friends for 6 years before her BFF, Amber, came around. I recently moved to a different state, and right before I left she said, "I'll miss you." But imagine how much of a wreck I'd be if Amber moved.
That sounds pretty rough. It's tough when you realize you're not someone's priority, especially after being friends for a long time. It can sting when someone you thought was close just sees you as a backup. Moving away makes it even harder, since it feels like the friendship really wasn't mutual. I get how that can leave a bad taste.
My best friend during junior and high school was poor, so I always spotted him when we went to eat or see movies. I never expected anything in return, but later on I was going through some hard times, and he had it a bit better. The guy was a cheap fuck that wouldn't even spot me a soda or lend me $5. I must have spent thousands over the years helping him out. Lesson: a person that takes and takes without ever offering to chip and will most likely be a toxic cheap fuck, not worth your friendship.
It's funny how friendships work sometimes. I had a similar experience where I helped out a friend a lot, never thinking twice about it. When I needed help, they vanished. It makes you rethink who you spend your time with. People can surprise you, but not always in a good way. It's a clear reminder to pay attention to give and take in friendships. Just keep that in mind moving forward.
When he asked me to show up 3 hours before our shift together to hang out at his place. He answered the door, said, "Oh, sorry man, we fell asleep," then went back to bed with his girlfriend and left me standing in the front room until I decided to leave. Sat at work for 2.5 hours before my shift because I live an hour and a half away. Closely followed by the night, he texted me when my friend was playing a gig at a bar. He said, "Hey man, stay put and miss your last bus. We're coming over, and you can come crash at our place after last call." Then he texted me 20 minutes after my last bus, 40 minutes later, saying, "Oh, sorry man, we got too stoned and dozed off."
That's rough. Waiting around like that can be frustrating. It's a bummer when plans fall through, especially when you make an effort to be there. It's like he didn't really think it through. At least you got some extra time to think about it at work. But getting left high and dry after an invite can make you reconsider hanging out next time. Just have to keep those expectations low, I guess.
I told them I was sick, really sick, and I never heard from them again. They called again months later to ask for something, and I couldn't barely contain my anger, though I still sent them what they wanted. I just found out I'm pregnant, and it feels weird not sharing the news. Like I've forgotten to tell someone, but I know inviting them back and will only end in tears and hurt feelings again.
It's tough when people disappear when you need them. You try to show kindness, but it feels one-sided. Keeping that big news to yourself weighs heavy. You want to share, but you know the past won't change. It's a lot to think about, figuring out who deserves to be in your life during such a big moment.
When she asked me to be a bridesmaid, I of course said yes. Then a month or two later, there were pictures on Facebook of her and her other bridesmaids getting dresses together. There was no message, phone call, anything from her. We were best friends since first grade until around just after high school when we just started drifting. Some sort of notification would have been nice, but life.
It's interesting how friendships evolve. I once had a similar situation with a close friend. We were really tight in school, but after graduation, we just grew apart. I saw her posting about her wedding plans without a word to me. It stung a bit. But I guess that's just how life goes sometimes. You can't force connections that fade over time. It happens to a lot of people.
When she lost her job, met a guy one night, then invited him to live in her room, without paying rent. For months, got pregnant from said guy, married him, and moved out, owing me $800 and refused to respond to my calls, /text, /messages. Then I found her at a bar almost a year later, when she proceeded to apologize and said she was going through a rough time, which I get, and that she would add me on FB and we could catch up. She never did, and the next time I saw her a few months after that, she pretended that she had sent it and said she was going to send it again. Needless to say, it never happened.
I had a friend who went through a lot. Lost her job, met a guy, and they moved in together. Things escalated quickly, and suddenly she was gone, leaving debts behind. A year later, I ran into her. She apologized, said she was struggling, and promised to reconnect, but it never happened. It was frustrating to see someone just drift away like that, especially when you've invested time in the friendship.
We were best friends all the way through junior high and high school, and were roommates our first year of college. I treated him, if this is the right way to put it, too much like a sibling and not like a best friend. I was hard on him, would lose my temper too easily, was demanding of him. One night he and some other mutual friends were supposed to pick me up to go out drinking, and they just didn't show up. They apologized profusely, and we still hung out after that, but slowly drifted apart. I made new friends, and after a while started seeing my behavior in others, which made assess my past behavior. It hurt a lot, but over time I realized it was mostly my fault. It made me a better person. I think it made me a bit more withdrawn from people, but I learned to be a better friend and not be so hard on people.
It's interesting how friendships evolve. I had a similar experience where I took a friend for granted. I was always pushing him to be better and didn't realize it was driving him away. When he started hanging out with different people, it hit me. Reflection can sting, but it helps to grow. Now I'm more mindful of how I treat those close to me. Sometimes you need to learn the hard way.
When we would grab a beer after work and talk, and I couldn't relate to anything going on in his life anymore. His involvement with the church, I left the church 8 years ago. His issues with his marriage, never married, and felt like his marriage was a mistake from the start, and his kids, don't have any, don't want any. The things we used to have in common don't interest him anymore, and the things that interest him now don't interest me. Doesn't make either of us wrong per se, just means we grew apart.
It's kind of strange how friendships can change. We used to share a lot, but now it feels like we're on different paths. His life revolves around family and faith, while I'm focused on other things. It's not that either of us is in the wrong, we just don't relate like we used to. Still, it's part of life to grow and change, I guess. Just different priorities now.
It was when I realized how one-sided the friendship was. She didn't really care about me. She just used me as a place to vent, and if I wasn't available right when she wanted me to be, it's not like I have a family to take care of or anything. I would never hear the end of it. But when I had an issue or needed to vent, she would remind me that what I was going through wasn't nearly as bad as what she had going on, so I had no right to complain. At one point, I gently tried to point out that there were solutions to many of her issues, but let's just say that it wasn't well received. After a good 20 minutes of nonstop berating, I decided I had had enough of that toxic relationship and completely cut ties. In spite of how she treated me, it sucked losing my best friend of 8 years.
I get that. It can be rough realizing a friendship isn't balanced. It's hard when you put in effort and don't get it back. When I had a similar situation, it felt like I was losing a part of my daily life. But sometimes, walking away is the best option. It hurts, but it's better than staying in a toxic dynamic. You have to look out for yourself first.
After joining the AF, he moved to Maryland. We kept in touch for years sporadically, but recently I heard he had been in town several times. His mom's house is literally a half-mile from mine. When I heard this, it happened to be at a time when he was actually in town. I never got so much as a phone call, so that pretty much concluded that friendship, I suppose.
Sometimes people drift apart, even if they live close by. It's kind of strange when you realize someone you used to be close with is just a short walk away but doesn't reach out. I mean, it happens. Life changes things. I guess it's just a reminder that friendships can fade, and that's okay. You just move on and focus on those who do stay in touch.
When we realized we had absolutely nothing in common. He was literally this outdoorsy mountain hiking man, pretty much like that Man vs. Wild guy. Those people who would go camping and tying knots, going canoeing and all that bullshit like every week. Meanwhile, there's me who is very into comic books and video games and loves reading a good book inside to those Hollywood execs who insist on having two completely characters as best friends for eternity. It's bullshit, lol.
It's funny how friendship works sometimes. We clicked for a bit, but our interests were miles apart. He would share his hiking stories while I was stuck on the latest comic plot twist. Both worlds felt so different. It's a reminder that not all friendships need to be about shared activities. Sometimes, just being around someone different can be interesting, even if we never quite get each other.
When it dawned on me that we hadn't spoken months and neither of us cared. I guess we just grew apart. We lived in different towns an hour and a half apart. By the time I had made it back to his place, he was introducing me to all his new buddies. I'd been replaced. I guess we're both at fault.
It's kind of strange when you realize friendships change over time. You think you have that bond, but life happens. Sometimes it's just distance, or new people coming in. It's a little sad, but also part of growing up. In the end, I guess it's a lesson about how connections can fade, even if they meant something at one point. Just a reminder that life moves on, and so do we.
We have been best friends for about 20 years. As we got older, her attitude became more and more my way or the highway. One day I had plans to go to a party for another friend I hadn't seen in a couple of years. Best friend called me up the day before the party and wanted to get together, and I told her I had other plans, but I was free the next day. That was unacceptable to her, and she guilted me into leaving the party early to meet her at a restaurant. I left the party just as the majority of people started arriving. As soon as I got to the restaurant parking lot, she peeled out of the lot and left. I called her 3 times over the following week, but she didn't return calls. Over the next month, I arranged for another friend to be the executor of my estate and all that legal stuff. Months later, I got a birthday card from her, and the card said, "Happy birthday. I don't want to be friends with you anymore. I needed to send you this for closure. She'll die a lonely old woman."
It's pretty tough when a long-time friendship turns sour. You invest so much over the years, then one day it just falls apart. It's like she couldn't handle not being the center of attention. You left a party for her, and she just bailed. That's cold. It's wild how people change, and sometimes it makes you reevaluate who you really want in your life. Sometimes it's better to move on.
When I got a voicemail for my birthday explaining how she is so busy, but we will make plans soon. Then I realized she said the same thing on my birthday the year prior, and I hadn't seen her once despite sending invitations and my making suggestions. This was 6 years ago, and I am still sad about it.
It's tough when friends get too busy for birthdays. I had a similar experience where a friend kept saying they would hang out, but it never happened. I tried to reach out a few times, but it felt one-sided. Eventually, you just accept that some people drift apart. It's a bit disappointing, but life goes on, I guess. Just focus on the ones who actually show up.
When I went through a terrible breakup, I had been dating a girl for almost 2 years, and when it was over, I was so down. Didn't even know how to move forward. I lived with that girl, and when I needed a place to stay, he offered. He made me laugh when I was about to cry. He talked me through all the hard times. He kept me busy by inviting me everywhere. We'd sit out on his porch drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. He reminded me that I'd soon feel better. He helped pay for food and didn't make me pay rent. He let me get back on my feet. He was no longer my best friend. He became more than that. My brother.
That's a solid story about friendship. Breakups hit hard, and having someone there makes a big difference. Your friend really stepped up when you needed it most. It's cool how those tough times can turn a friendship into something deeper. Just hanging out, sharing moments like coffee on the porch, shows the importance of support. Sounds like you two really helped each other out during that rough patch.
When I said I wouldn't have married my then fiancé, now husband, unless she was able to attend the ceremony and stand up there next to me. But when she got engaged shortly thereafter, she told me over Messenger and already had the date set in stone and her bridesmaids picked out. Spoiler alert, I wasn't one of the ones she picked, and I was out of the country on the day she picked.
That's pretty rough. It sounds like there were some clear expectations from you that didn't get met. It's tough when someone you care about makes decisions without including you, especially for something as big as a wedding. Being away on that day must have made it even harder. Friendships sometimes take weird turns like that. Just shows how life can throw unexpected things your way.
He moved away and never called, but that's okay, because when he came into town, we'd have a ton of fun together. Then when he came into town, he kept rescheduling or saying he'd be over and then never show up while we stayed up all night waiting for him. Eventually, I started dreading him coming over because it was just so much stress. Now I think he's been into town a few times and just not told me, so I feel okay to let go and stop calling him a friend, but I can't help but think of him all the time because I was just in the habit for a long time. I wish we'd stayed in touch, but we're so different now I doubt we'll ever have a real conversation again.
It's tough when friendships fade like that. You wait around, hoping for those fun times, but it turns into stress instead. I guess it's normal to feel that way, especially when you've invested so much time. Sometimes, people just change and drift apart. It's okay to let go, even if it's hard at first. You might carry those memories for a while, but moving on can bring some peace too.
When I was arrested with my friends, Ken shared a prescription that was expired. He left it at my house on a weekend of drinking and partying. I told the cops it wasn't mine, and it was his. His name was on the bottle. I asked him to tell them, but since he was in a semi-Ivy League school in D.C., he never returned my calls/texts again, and I got charged with it. Luckily, it was expunged from my record late last year, but that whole experience fucked me up mentally. He was my only friend at the time, and he abandoned me to take the fall even though he wouldn't have gotten in trouble since he was legally prescribed the meds. He tried to apologize last month, and I just flat out blocked his number. Now the only friends I have are my coworkers. Being an introvert isn't as bad as it sounds.
That sounds rough. It's tough when a friend leaves you hanging like that, especially when you were looking out for them. People can surprise you in bad ways. Glad to hear it got expunged, but dealing with that mentally is hard. Sometimes having coworkers as friends can be better though. At least you know they have your back in a different way.
When after seeing he and his wife through her breast cancer, through her remission and its return, planning her funeral, delivering her eulogy, and attending all the post-death appointments with him, he announced that his counselor had advised him to jettison me along with a few other close friends in order to begin his life again.
That sounds really tough. It's hard to see someone you care about go through such pain, and then to be pushed away after all that. I get that sometimes people think they need a fresh start, but it doesn't make it hurt any less. It's just a reminder that life can be complicated, and not everyone handles grief in the same way.
When they stopped talking to me out of the blue, I ran into him some time later, and he told me I didn't fit in with his religion or something along those lines. To this day, I still have no clue as to what he meant by that. I'm not religious, but he did way worse things than I did. Some people are quite strange.
It's weird how people can just cut you off like that. I had a friend do the same. One day we were fine, then out of nowhere, they just didn't want anything to do with me. I never found out why, just like your experience. It's confusing when you think you know someone, but they surprise you in odd ways. People have their reasons, even if they don't make sense to us.
I realized I was drifting away from my best friend when all he ever talked was talking about partying and girls. Don't get me wrong, I party from time to time, but there is so much more to life than that. While I'm off as a senior in school, he is out in the military drinking and trying to get laid. I still love the guy to death. We have been friends for going on 22 years now, but I just don't see him as I used to, and I don't think we will ever be as close as we once were.
It's tough when friendships change like that. You grow up and start wanting different things. It's not that you don't care about each other, but priorities shift. Life takes you in different directions. It's a bit sad to think about, but sometimes that's just how it goes. It'll be interesting to see where both of you end up in a few years.
I wasn't invited to his wedding. I'd known him for more than 20 years, her for nearly 10. I just went on Facebook one day, and his status was, "Holy fuck, I'm getting married in the morning," which I thought was a little odd as I'd heard nothing at all about it. The next day, there were pictures from his wedding. The couple, family, mutual friends, even guys from school he'd not seen for a decade. To this day, I have no idea why I wasn't invited. I tried dragging the friendship on for a few months, but honestly, it crushed me, and I never did find the right moment to ask why. They moved to Japan last summer. He's happy, which is cool, but it still bothers me whenever I see or hear anything remotely wedding-related in my day-to-day life. One day I'll ask him why I wasn't invited. Chances are he just forgot. One of those situations where I wrongly assumed the best friends thing went both ways.
That's rough. It's always a surprise when someone you consider a close friend doesn't keep you in the loop. It happens though, life gets in the way. You probably did the right thing by trying to keep the friendship going, even if it hurt. His move to Japan adds a layer to it, but maybe one day you'll get the chance to ask him. Sometimes these things just slip people's minds.
When our circle of friends had a party and I wasn't invited, I called him and he was there. I asked what was going on and he tried to deny what was happening and then was like, "Oh, well, you can still come if you want." Even found out some of my other friends I had introduced him to were there. I had known all these guys since grade school, some of them. I helped battle depression, relationships, and I was always available for them. I even introduced my best friend to his GF at the time, now his wife. That hurt like hell. I tried to think back and figure out what I had done, but there was nothing. I even still to this day try to figure out what had happened, and the only thing I can think of was he had another good buddy who was a pretty jealous guy and for some reason saw me as an intrusion. Either way, I lost my best friend and 4 other buddies that day. It was at the end of high school, and I was moving off to university, so the sting was lessened.
That sounds rough. It's tough when you feel cut out from a group you thought you were close to, especially when you've been there for them. It stings even more when you realize you played a role in others' lives and still got sidelined. It's hard to pinpoint what went wrong, but it's clear that dynamics can shift unexpectedly. Losing friends like that can change a lot, but at least you were moving on to new opportunities.
I had a really close friend who I met at the very beginning of college, and we were close the entire time. She was a bit antisocial, but we would hang out and talk all the time. As soon as we graduated and SE moved home, I barely heard from her. I even know she could have died after not hearing back from her for months. Then she randomly makes a Facebook account to write on the walls of 2 other people saying how much she missed them and loved them, but never reached out to me. After all we had done together, and all the things I did for her, it hurt to lose her as a friend.
It's tough when you think someone is a close friend, and then they just fade away. You put in the effort, but sometimes people just move on in ways you don't expect. It's a weird feeling to see them reach out to others but not you. Makes you question the friendship. Just shows you can't rely on everyone to stay in touch after big life changes.
Made plans to go to the local pool on that summer Tuesday, so we would meet there. I get there, lock my bike up, and go in and get changed and sit for a little to wait for him. 10 minutes passed, I decide I'll pass time in the pool and swim alone for a little bit. 10 more pass, and I'm worried, so I get out and ask a stranger to borrow me their phone to call him. Was 12 at the time and didn't have my own. My mom didn't know I was there at the pool. Called him up and asked him where he is, and he says, I went and played video games at Chad's house. I didn't really want to go to the pool. Well, after that, I kind of was done with the shitty one-sided friendship, so I stopped being friends with him altogether.
That's a rough situation. You show up to hang out, and your friend bails for video games. That's pretty telling about how much he valued your plans. It's good you recognized that and moved on. Friendships should be mutual, and it's okay to cut ties when they're not. At 12, that's a tough lesson, but it helps you figure out who's worth your time. Yeah, not everyone sticks around like they should.
When I asked her to be bridesmaid, and she didn't seem interested. When she was too busy to come to my hen do during the day, but could have come for a few hours in the evening, and didn't when I suggest cheap plans 6 months in advance, and she claims she can't afford to go along with them. And yes, she works. No, she doesn't struggle financially. When it became evident that although she was polite to him, she didn't like my husband, and made it very clear. When she sat outside my wedding in her car with her husband right until seconds before it started, then moaned they couldn't sit together because there weren't any seats together. Only during the ceremony, I still like her. We still talk, but she's clearly not my best friend anymore. It leaves me at a loss, because now I feel I don't have one.
It sounds like a tough situation. Friends can drift apart, especially during big life changes. You try to include them and make plans, but they don't show much effort in return. It can be frustrating, especially when you still care about them. It's normal to feel lost when a close friendship fades. Maybe it's time to focus on other relationships or new connections that feel more supportive.
When she started making racist remarks about the President of the United States, who got Obamacare passed, so she was able to get affordable health care for the first time in over 5 years. She was a cancer survivor. That intellectual disconnect in a college professor really killed our friendship.
It's interesting how some people can hold contradictory views without realizing it. The fact that she benefited directly from a policy but still made negative remarks about it says a lot. I guess it's tough when you find out someone you respect has a blind spot like that. It's hard to keep a friendship going when the foundation of mutual understanding cracks like that. Just makes you think about people's perspectives.
when she got a BF and got a place with him when we were 22. We are almost 28 now. She rarely responds to my texts anymore, and she never wants to do anything because she lives too far. She lives 15 to 20 minutes away from me, but she doesn't like to drive. Ever. She will reach out to me about every 6 months or so to see what's up, and she will say she wants to hang out, but that never happens.
It's kind of tough when someone you were close to drifts away. I had a similar situation with a friend who moved in with her boyfriend. We used to talk all the time, but now it's like pulling teeth to make plans. I get it. Life changes, priorities shift. It's just a shame when connections fade. You want to stay in touch, but it feels one-sided. Hope things improve, but it is what it is.
When my grandfather died, and she wasn't even remotely there for me. When I came back from his funeral, the first thing she said to me was how she and a mutual friend had gotten into some feud/drama over something ridiculously stupid while I was gone. We had been friends for over 4 years at this point. When the guy I had met in a class just a few months before was 100% there for me, actually asked me how I was doing every time I talked to him, shared way more interest with me, and clicked with me way more than her. When my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and all she had to say was, "That's scary," and then didn't make any effort to talk to me for over a month after that. When she admitted to being a shitty friend, but didn't apologize or seem to regret it. When she wants to hang out, it's always me walking the 25 minutes to her place, never her coming over to mine. We still get along, and she's not a toxic person. She's very selfish, and I had to learn to not lean on her for emotional support. We're still friends, just not best friends.
It's interesting how friendships can change over time. You invest in someone, but sometimes it feels one-sided. In tough moments like funerals or family health issues, you find out who really shows up for you. I guess it's a lesson in recognizing who you can rely on and adjusting your expectations. You can still be friends, but it's okay to know where those boundaries are. Sometimes, it's just about acceptance.
When he started dealing drugs, I told him it was either being friends with me or being friends with this drug dealer he thought was cool. He chose the dealer. I went back to his house, grabbed my stuff, and went home. We didn't really hang out again, except for a couple times years later at an arcade. He paid for everything. We always told each other we'd find time to hang out again, but we never did. Doubt either of us really meant it, was more of a please entry. He died around 2 years ago. He was shot in a bar by a masked gunman in an apparent mob hit. I'll never forget the best friend I had, the guy he was before he turned to crime.
That's a tough story. It's always hard to see a friend make choices that lead them down a dark path. Sometimes you think you can still connect with them later, but life just pulls you in different directions. It's a shame that it ended like that, especially after all those memories. I guess it shows how quickly things can change and how important it is to value the good moments.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.